Welcome to another episode of the Uglobal Investment Immigration Podcast. I'm your host, Salman Siddiqui, live from Berlin. Today, we are going to focus on Italy's program about the investment immigration options there. Now, a lot has been happening in Italy lately, especially with the political developments there. We don't know what's happening there in terms of the options for investors, especially immigrant investors there, what kind of future they have. There's a lot of nervous conversations online. So to help us all unpack what's happening there, really, we have a special guest today from Italy. His name is Marco Mazzeschi. He's the founder of Mazzeschi law firm. Welcome to the show, Marco.
Thank you, Salman. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you. So, Marco, can you give us first an overview of the residency options for investors and high net worth individuals in Italy? How many are there, and which one leads to permanent residency? Let's first talk about that.
I will focus on the most popular two options, basically, because there are many other options, but they are related to having a work or being sponsored by a company. So I'm talking about individuals who are not sponsored by a company. The apparently easiest option is a so-called elective resident visa. Is a kind of retirement visa. It's apparently easy because the requirements are very simple. You must show to have a passive income exceeding not less of 31,000 euro a year, passive income, not deriving from work, and then accommodation in Italy. And then all the rest is left to the discretion of the consulate. Because why I say apparently easy? Because this is a totally discretionary visa to be decided by each Italian consulate. To give you an example, more recently, most consulates require a much higher income than the minimum. So many people think, I just a little above the minimum, I can get the visa. There is no guarantee. Secondly, the processing time at the consulate is very long. The consulate will answer you. First of all, it's long. It's difficult to get an appointment. After you get an appointment, you file your application together with your passport. It will be kept by the consulate. And then it goes on for months. The consulate says we have the time to answer 90 days, but then they request more documents. So we hardly take in any of these cases because I know that most the times clients will be unhappy with the fact that we cannot do anything to speed up the process with the consulate and so on. Another negative point of this visa is that it does not allow any kind of work in Italy. And so the consulate look at your age, at your last tax returns. If you see that you're recently working, then it's harder to get this visa. The second option is the investor visa, the Italy's golden visa, which is more expensive, but more predictable because once it is approved, it doesn't entail any discretion on the consulate, but we can discuss.
That's fine. And I want to ask you this about the changes which are expected in Italy's this investor-focused visa. Are there any changes expected? I'm asking you this because, as you know, there's been a big change in the government recently in Italy, where you have government which is not seen by the world as a more, let's say, immigration friendly. Now, giving that sort of background, can you tell our listeners, is that true, the perception? What should one expect in terms of the changes to the immigration and investor visa law? Is something happening there?
Frankly, I don't think there is any impact on the new environment and new political situation for some reasons. Many people are scared by the fact of what's happening in Portugal, for example, or other countries. People must consider two things. First, Italy investor visa does not include real estate investment. One of the issues that I've read was linked to the Portugal visa is that created a lot of disruption in the real estate market. Italy does not include real estate. Secondly, for some reasons, the Italy golden visa has not been much publicized. So you must consider that until recently, probably have been issued since 2018. There have been kind of 500, 600 investor visas issued. It's not particularly difficult. It's simply because, most of not including real estate, is not attractive for many agencies to sell or promote this visa. That's one of the reasons. So many people, they don't know. Many of our clients, they approach us with other visa options. And when I explain to them the investor visa option, they say, but how funny is I didn't find any mention in the consulate website. So, and this is not a surprise for Italy, because Italy, we are, for certain things made in Italy, we have to do the best thing. So once we do it, we don't need to publicize it. All the world should know it. That's what's happening in reality. I don't expect so far any changes.
So, I mean, I get that from you, that the lack of awareness perhaps is there about Italy's investor visa option. But I want to understand from you the current government's outlook on investor visa. Is it encouraging that? Are you seeing the numbers of approvals of investor visas recently on the rise? Is it at the same level as before? And what are you reading between the lines in terms of encouragement for people to apply for this route?
No, definitely there's been a huge increase. The latest available figures, official figures, at the end of 2021, there were only 60 investor visas issued until then. Then I see that when we receive an approval, the client receive an application, and on the top of the PDF there is a number. So from my estimate, in 2022 there have been kind of 300 or 400 at least investor visas. We have followed many. And this is not a surprise, because in conjunction with the investor visa, or similar, more or less at the same time, Italy has approved this quite well-known tax flat rate of 100,000 euro a year flat. So many, they put together, many first, they think that by applying for the flat tax rate scheme, they can obtain something like an immigration status. In reality, the government didn't link the two things. So immigration and tax are two parallel routes. But now many family offices, they are aware of the fact that many clients, many EU citizens, they don't need any visas. They can just move in Italy and apply for a flat tax rate. Non-EU citizens can take benefit of the fact that they moving residency to Italy. They can obtain this 100,000 flat tax rate for whatever they have abroad.
About the tax rates, we're going to talk about that a little later on. But I want to stay on this point about how, I mean, this is a very encouraging sign that the number of investor visas are on the rise. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, this is also because of the post-pandemic era that we're seeing. The pandemic is now, gone. And of course, this is sort of expected that the numbers of the investor visas would increase after that, isn't it?
Yeah, post-pandemic, in conjunction with, I think, two other things: the euro-dollar currency. So this become, especially for Americans, much more convenient to invest in Italy, the euro area, and the political turmoil in the United States, after the latest the election of Mr. Biden, the riots and the uncertainties about possible new troubles in view of the new elections. Many, they take into account second residency, and what we didn't mention, that Italy investor visa is the only one which explicitly by law does not require you to spend any minimum time in Italy. So for some clients who are not taking into account the flat tax rate, it's still convenient, because if they have the second home in Italy, they can get the investor visa and permit to stay in Italy. But if they spend less than 6 months a year in the country, they don't have any tax obligations.
That's right. I'm trying to understand who is applying for the investor visas in recent times, especially now. Are you seeing more from non-EU countries like the US now applying more than compared to before? What are the trends are you seeing there? And are there certain countries where you haven't seen successful applications in recent times?
we have a discrete number of applicants and visas that we have already followed. Most are for US nationals and UK nationals. UK, because they have been so close to Italy for so many years, and now they discovered after Brexit they can no longer spend more than 90 days, any 180 days, So it became, for whoever has a second home in Italy, is a difficult. Some Israeli, and no longer. Italy investor visa does not have any limitation in terms of nationalities. Only for a few months last year, there was put a ban against Belarus and Russian citizens. Has been lifted. So now the problem is not getting the visa itself, is getting all the bank declarations first, and then opening the bank account after, because many banks are reluctant to work. I have a couple of clients, Russian, who were already living in the EU, so they have a EU permit, so they are specifically exempted from any sanctions by the EU regulation, and still they didn't have a lot of troubles opening a bank account because the banks, they saw that they still have a Russian passport, didn't want to proceed. We don't have so far, even though I have some good connection with China and Taiwan, not very, very few applicants due to some. I think the main reason from China is that there are now limitations in moving your capitals. There is a very strict limitation in sending your money, funds abroad in excess of 50,000 euro, or you must give a lot of explanations, And many from Asian countries, they have a preferential, prefer to go to Canada for the language, for the bigger Chinese communities, Chinese speaking communities. So we don't see a big number, very limited number from Chinese speaking countries.
Right. And you're saying that the restrictions perhaps might be on the end of, say, for example, in China's case, in China, the restrictions might be there, but not from Italy or Italy's government. Because I'm asking this because, as you know, Italy's new government, which is in power now, I'm trying to understand if they have certain preferences for certain countries' applicants or not.
No. The main point for obtaining the investor visa is not nationality. Is simply the most difficult part is obtaining the letter first from one bank, confirming that they've carried out a very detailed due diligence. They want the Italian government, the Italian ministry asked for a letter very specific, that the bank has carried out the due diligence under the FATF regulations on the following points: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And suddenly, strangely, because this regulation has been implemented by most countries, but many banks, they don't want to use the language required by the ministry. So that's the part that sometimes takes negotiation of a couple of months with the bank to adjust the language in a format that is still acceptable by the ministry. But it's not related to nationality.
I see. Okay. And let's talk about, you sort of hinted that the kind of banking regulations are there now. And let's talk about the impact of the Ukraine war, which is still ongoing in Europe, on the country's program. Have you seen more applicants from, for example, countries like Russia, Belarus, and of course, Ukraine in the investor visa route since that time, since last year?
Russia, there is definitely an increasing interest. The fact that I tell you, unless they have a second passport or they were already leaving the EU, our answer is that, again, there is no limit in requiring the investor visa, but how can you, if you are Russian, you are falling with this category, you are subject to the limitation. The bank cannot transfer more than 100,000 euro. There is EU guidelines. So you cannot obtain a letter from a bank confirming that they can transfer €500,000, which is one of the requirements for the Italian investor visa.
And it seems applies to the Belarusian nationals as well.
Yeah, but we didn't have any application from Belarus or request or query from Belarus, I have to tell you. What we didn't discuss is what are the requirements in terms of kind of investment, The cheapest one is €250,000, but in a startup company. Startup companies, not only new companies, are special companies dealing with IT and innovative projects.
Before we jump on that, I also wanted to find out from you if Ukrainians are applying for the investor visa route. Are you seeing that trend?
No. Initially, the great number of Ukrainians were granted a special status arriving in Italy if they left due to the war. But so far, no. So far, we didn't have any application from Ukraine.
I see. Okay, that's interesting. And another thing I want to understand from you is the investor visa route. Is there any eligibility criteria in terms of the language? Because that question always comes up.
No language. The ministry wants you to submit information like your CV, professional CV, but I don't know why, because there is no requirement. They want to look at you, but doesn't even the age. They want to see your history. Also in terms of checking if you're politically exposed, for example. These kind of things. But no language requirement. No, the only requirement is this criminal certificate for the countries of where the applicant has lived permanently for the last 10 years.
Okay, and moving on, you also mentioned that Italy doesn't offer the real estate option like we see in other countries like Portugal, you mentioned, and Malta as well. So don't you think Italy is missing out by not providing that, or has missed out on that opportunity that a lot of countries were offering?
Some years ago, actually, I was asked to issue a support letter, like an opinion for one of the Italian real estate association to plead with the ministry to include real estate. But I probably have changed my mind, because I've seen what happened in many countries where you including real estate, has created a disruption into the market,
Right.
And
right.
in reality, if you look at the client interest, the Italian investor visa is not so bad, because if you invest, one of the most popular investments that we do for clients, we assist clients using a bank with buying shares of listed companies. So in that case, the only risk is the stock market. But if you buy a blue chip, like some companies that are partly owned by the government, you know that your risk is limited. If you see what happening for many years in Portugal, where in some cases there are clients who are sold overvalued properties, and then the other positive part is that if for any reason you change the applicant after a few years change its mind, you can resell the shares on the market the next day. While real estate, you don't know if the market value is the same unless you purchase a trophy asset in the center of a major city. Perhaps is not immediately sellable. You must put it in the market, pay commission. So the option of the shares of listed company is relatively safe. I saw very few clients purchasing shares of private companies because it's more complicated. You must negotiate, you must do due diligence. You are a minority shareholder, you must negotiate a shareholder agreement to regulate what rights you have. So most of our clients in shares, or there are a limited number of funds where clients can invest. If they cannot do their own portfolio, so they cannot choose, I buy 3 shares of 3 different companies. If you buy shares, you must buy shares of one single company.
Are you saying that perhaps Italy was smart in not offering that from the start in terms of real estate? It sort of, in hindsight, turned out to be a good way forward.
Thank you. You are very generous in saying that Italy was smart. Frankly, I don't think it was a meditated decision. Probably realized that it was difficult to articulate the option. What do you mean to buy something that you must restore? Because it not linked to the investor visa, but there is now simultaneously these €1 houses.
Right. Yes. Exactly. €1 options are coming up in villages and all of
which
that.
Which is linked to also approving or presenting a plan for refurbishment. And so if you look at into writing a law which is carefully drafted, it's not easy to regulate such an option. Going to another option that is not yet operative is like the digital nomad visa. The digital nomad visa in Italy was approved on paper by law, general law last year, and they say further requirements, the specific requirement will be approved a further decree, and the decree is still on hold, because if you think about digital nomad visa, about how do you regulate for tax, for social security, for insurance. So in a country like a structure like Italy or bigger countries, I know that Spain has done it, but it's not easy to, it also has some possible problems of violating rights. I mean, why do you give a preferential tax rate to a worker coming in Italy as a digital nomad compared to someone who is working in Italy regularly,
Right. And that's what I want to understand from you about coming to the topic of digital nomad visa. We see a lot of countries in the region and outside the region, they have offered that during the pandemic, and it was very successful for many countries. But in Italy, what's happening about the digital nomad visa, what seems to me is the fact that it got stuck in this legal bureaucracy thing, and it just got stuck there, and they are missing out. And it seems like there's no solution out there. That option will still not be there on the table. And why is that? When will this be solved, do you think?
At the end of April, I posted something on LinkedIn celebrating the first non-birthday of the Italian digital nomad visa, because it was been 1 year since it is approval by law, but the law says the requirements and conditions will need to be approved with a decree to be coordinated by 4 different ministries. Then the government changed. And so now it is not a priority. And it's too difficult to coordinate the work of 4 ministries in different parties, and despite the fact that something is happening also in major countries, I mean, no longer in small countries. With Spain is now at the digital nomad visa for 6 months, and I think it's working,
Right.
The missing opportunity, but it's like the investor visa. I mean, if you see that Italy approved the investor visa very late compared to other European countries, 2018, became operative in 2019. For the first 2 years, there were 20 investor visas.
Right. Let's talk about the future options that we can think would be there apart from the investor visa. Hopefully, the digital nomad visa will be approved soon. What are you seeing in terms of the government's policies? Are they planning to give more incentives to investors to come here? Or is this going to be the only options at the moment, do you think?
From what I know, I don't have any political connection, but I don't think there is anything on the agenda, Another option we didn't talk about is that, but there are a few hundred quotas every year, but it could be for innovative entrepreneurs. There is a startup visa.
Yes, let's talk about the startup visa. You mentioned that earlier as well. Let's talk about that visa and what are the requirements for that, and the minimum thresholds that one needs for it. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, the minimum threshold is very low. I mean, the investor must show the availability of 50,000 euro, so not much. But they shouldn't focus on the funds, which is the second thing. I mean, the most important point is to being able to show an innovative project, an innovative idea. They look at also the candidate's CV. So if I'm a lawyer and I present a project that I want to develop some special IT product, they will not consider myself, so they look if you have a PhD, if you have a master, if you have a professional experience in certain sectors, and they look at the proposal. I suggest clients to prepare a short PowerPoint, a good business plan for the first 2 years. And if they have more than 50,000 euro to show, better, because better than me, money is the king everywhere. So if you are serious and you say, and it will not be a risk, because basically if you get a visa, within 1 year from arrival in Italy, you will create your own company and the money will be used for your own company. So it's not something that you must invest in a third-party company. Even though the startup visa also include the possibility of joining an existing startup. But in this case, it can be more, again, it's like an investor visa for startup. It means that you have to do the due diligence, discuss with the partners, put the money in a company that you hopefully will be the next Google or Yahoo, but you don't know. While if you start your own company, it's all the money that you put are under your control.
But the question here is, Marco, that how does the government define innovation? What do they mean by that? Like, it seems like a very vague and broad term, like, for example, for me, I might come up with an idea. To me, it's the most innovative idea in the world, but it might not be an innovative or sound business plan to the government. So can you give us an example of some success stories of what that could define what innovation means, or what kind of things they're looking for, basically?
Yeah, the innovation was left on purpose vague because the ministry wants to have the discretionary power to decide yes or no. I had clients who coming from telecommunications. I don't exactly know, but a manager who had worked 20 years in telecommunication, I think it was Ukraine, already some years ago before the war, that came to Italy and proposed some tools for implementing some cables in telecommunications or IT, blockchain. Another client has several patents on soap, but on a special formula for soap, for example. Another client several years ago from Russia, he said he obtained an approval because I will create a website which will put in touch Russian citizens in Italy with suppliers. It was not so innovative, but it worked. But recently, the ministry committee has become more strict because what happened in some years ago, they gave too many. They didn't issue many of these visas, but they gave too many to Chinese who did not really intend to do business or live in Italy. They wanted just to have a second residence. So they have some flow of Chinese. The success rate of these visas is generally, if you look at the statistics, 50%. But again, not because it's particularly difficult. What I tell now clients that there's no need for our help for the initial phase. You register on a ministry platform. So I don't want to charge clients for doing nothing. I tell them, be focused on creating something, a new idea, really something new. Doesn't need to have a Nobel Prize idea, but need to be that I not simply want to open a shop for selling shoes in Florence. It needs to be something connected with telecommunication, IT, robotics, biotechnology, all these new areas, And then that's all. I mean, if they obtain the visa, some hurdle that some clients are finding is, again, the bank letter. Obtaining a bank letter confirmation that they have available funds. You can't imagine how many people stuck with investor visa or with this visa at the beginning say, oh, okay, I've no problem with my bank. And then the bank, they don't want to use the language required by the ministry.
I see. Okay. Could you explain that a little more? Why they don't want to do that, and why does this happen?
Oh, I cannot believe. The last bank a few days ago, he started a letter saying we write this letter, but we don't take any responsibility. So I say, what you don't take responsibility even for the things you write. So what's the purpose of writing the letter? Their legal team, sometimes they say, oh, we attach our money laundering policy, 30 pages, and we say that we comply with our money laundering policy. In reality, what the ministry is asking for is simply a confirmation of the adherence to the FATF standards, which have been implemented by most countries. So, in other terms, the Italian government is asking the bank to confirm that they're complying with their own law.
I see. Okay. All right. So what happens after that? Like, for example, if one gets through the startup visa or the investor visa, could you also explain to our listeners the residence permit they get? Do they get a temporary residence permit for 1 year, and then after a certain number of years, they get the permanent residence. Could you please explain that point?
After you obtain the visa, any kind of long-term visa, investor, elective residency, startup, you arrive in Italy. The first step is to apply for permit of stay. It's called police registration, let's say. It's an application in 3 steps. You apply at the post office, except for the investor visa where they can apply directly at the police, they skip 1 step. The police then will do the fingerprinting and the photo, and then you are given this card that is permesso di soggiorno, permit of stay. This card replaces the visa because for further extensions, you no longer need a visa. You go on extending the permit of stay, the police registration. Can be 1 or 2 years. And before the extension, you apply before the expiry, you apply for an extension. Simultaneously, many people confuse the step of residency. Okay, except for the investor visa, where you can decide not to register as a resident, as living in Italy with a city hall, the other permits require you to register with a comune, with a city hall, as a citizen living in the city hall jurisdiction. This is important because for 2 steps, with a permit of stay and by paying taxes, so you start paying taxes, after 5 years, even though you didn't register for residence with the city hall, you can apply for permanent residency. Permanent residency is a card which allows you to stay indefinitely in Italy. Now it must be not renewed, updated every 10 years, but you have the right to stay indefinitely in Italy with a language test and by showing that you have been paying taxes. Residency, on the other hand, is important. So registration with the city hall is important and vital if you want to apply for citizenship. Citizenship can be applied for after 10 years, but the 10 years start only from the date you are registered with the city hall. They don't look at your police registration. They look at the date when you register as living citizen with a comune, with a city hall.
I see. Okay, so it's all connected, and you have to start with the process right from the start with the city hall registration, and then permanent residency, and then citizenship.
So residency is important because it automatically brings some tax obligation, but it gives you, for example, the right to register with the Health National Service. It is required by the banks to open a bank account. You can buy a car, for example. Only by applying for residence with the city hall, you have the full rights.
And we are coming close to the end of our show, but before I let you go, I want to also understand from you what you mentioned earlier was about Italy's flat tax regime, and it has been gaining a lot of attention for its potential tax benefits. So just briefly, if you could provide an overview of how this tax regime works and what it offers to investors, why is it attractive? So if you could just talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a tax expert, but I can tell you that the process is that you, the applicant, who has not been living in Italy before the previous 10 years, can apply to the tax agency and showing to get an approval. It takes a few months to get approved for this preferential tax rate. What does it mean? That once you're approved, you move residency in Italy, and despite moving residency, that would in theory bring you subject to worldwide taxation. So Italy applied worldwide taxation system. So once you become residents, you pay taxes on your Italian income, but you must declare your income, taxes, anything that you have also abroad, and eventually pay taxes also on your foreign income unless it has been already taxed by a country which has an agreement against double taxation with Italy. To avoid this, if you have applied and get an approval for a flat tax rate, you come to Italy, you will pay every year 100,000 for you, plus eventually 25,000 for your spouse, and this covers whatever you have abroad. Income, you don't need to include in Italian tax declarations all any income, assets, portfolio, investment that you have abroad. Eventually, you are subject to the ordinary Italian tax rates if you have any income that you have in Italy, or if you own a property in Italy. So you must declare and pay regular taxes on whatever you have in Italy. There is another thing that it could be important. There is a special tax rate for pensioners, 7% tax rate for pensioners who move, but only in certain areas. So mostly is the center-south of Italy. So to attract people to move in areas which are less populated, the government has approved this only for pensioners, so people who can prove that they are no longer working.
Right. So for retirees, and they can come from any part of the world, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
The problem is that if they come from the EU, they don't need any visa. It's like the flat tax rate. I mean, can be applied by any individuals, but then if you are approved that these preferential flat tax rates, you still need to apply for a visa. Pensioners eventually will try to apply for this elective residence visa, the first one we discussed. But they may have difficulty because they have a low pension, a pension less than 31,000, or even exceeding, but not considered sufficient by the consulate, they may be rejected. We have had people contacted me who wanted to move to in Sicily or southern Italy from UK, and they were denied the visa because their pension was considered too low by the consulate.
I see. Okay. All right. And Marco, we're coming to the end of our show, but before I let you go, I also want to know from you is which visa category is more popular with your clients? Are you seeing more trend towards the investor visa or the retiree part that you just explained, or the startup one? What trends are you seeing these days?
Startup, they're not many. They've seen an increase in interest, but not many. Also because there are a few hundred quotas every year, but I don't see many applications. Because then after you need to start a company and so on. I think the most popular in terms of attraction is the elective residency, the retirement visa. Many they do by themselves. Many they contact us after receiving a denial. So because for this, as I told you, it seems very easy. You need to find, if you have already an accommodation in Italy, if you already own a house in Italy, you just need to prove that you have a passive income. For many others, the difficulty is that the consulate require a minimum 1-year lease agreement. And many, they say, okay, how can I commit to a 1-year lease agreement without knowing if I get a visa? Or in some parts, the landlords are not happy to sign only 1-year lease agreement. So they find this difficulty. Investor visa, we have seen a huge increase of number. In terms, again, we are talking about few hundred probably every year, but compared to before, but it's more expensive. So, it's not for everyone to be able to have available €500,000 to invest in buying shares, So it's definitely very attractive in terms, also because it doesn't require you to invest before. So there is no risk. You submit application, some documents, we help you preparing everything. You get the visa, so you invest only after you get the visa.
Right. And, especially for our American listeners who are listening to this episode, your recommendation is that they should go for the investor visa and get the benefits.
Yes, I mean, definitely. If there's some available funds, this is the most predictable route. Consider that when you apply for the elective resident visa, the consulate can keep your passport for 3-4 months. And it may take 1-2 months at least to get the appointment to file for the visa application. For the investor visa, you have a priority. In the initial phase, you don't need to leave your passport. When you get the approval by the ministry, you have a priority by the consulate. We have had some clients getting the visa in 2 days, some other in 1 week,
Yeah, but in terms of the Americans who are coming for this visa route, Marco, could you tell us like what kind of Americans are coming? Is it a single investor coming there, or are they moving with their families?
No, many are moving with their families. Okay, probably the majority, they just move permanently and take advantage of the flat tax rate. A few others, they had a second home in Italy, and they want to have the ability to not be stuck with the 90 days, but they will will stay in Italy in the aggregate less than 6 months a year. So they can spend more time in the summer, for example, and they will not have, for the time being, many that are continue working in the States, even though with investor visa, you are specifically allowed also to work. Huh?
Right,
A route that we didn't follow so far, because the law says the investor visa can also be converted. So possibly some people could try. I already proposed to some clients, why don't we, after 2 years, that is the initial permit, you could try and convert it into a self-employment permit, for example. If you are approved, you can withdraw the investment.
I see. So there are many options available there,
Yeah.
even through the investor visa route. Thank you so much for explaining all those options to us, Marco. I think there was a lot of new information for a lot of people out there. So I really, thank you for sharing all of this with us.
No, thank you, Salman, for hosting and for your questions. Very informative. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And in the end, I would just want to shout out to our listeners that please stay tuned to our show. We'll be bringing you more guests from around the world to talk about more investment immigration programs. So stay tuned. Thank you.